Imagine, if you will, stepping into a grand ballroom filled with people, each donning a mask. Some masks are painted with smiles, others with frowns, yet none reveal the true faces beneath. Now picture yourself entering this world without a mask. No deception, no pretense, no desire to manipulate those around you. How long do you think would you last in such a place? How quickly would you be dismissed as naive, foolish, or even weak? This, dear listeners, is the tragic fate of Prince Myshkin, the protagonist of The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. A man of pure heart, unwavering honesty, and boundless compassion. Myshkin is not celebrated for these virtues. Instead, he is ridiculed, manipulated, and ultimately broken by a society that cannot comprehend his goodness. But let us not be too quick to judge this as merely a tale from 19th century Russia. No, it is a reflection of a painful truth about human nature that remains just as relevant today. Why do good people so often find themselves at a disadvantage in the world? Why does sincerity invite mockery rather than respect? Most importantly, if being good leads to suffering, is it still worth it? By the end of this discussion, you will have a completely new perspective on kindness, morality, and the hidden dangers of being too good in a world that rewards cunning. The final insight we will explore is the most shocking of all, and it will change the way you see not just the world, but yourself. To understand why goodness is often mistaken for foolishness, we must first look at what society truly values. We like to think that we admire honesty, kindness, and integrity, but do we really? Or do we simply tolerate these qualities when they do not interfere with our own interests? Throughout history, the people who rise to power are rarely those who are purely good. Instead, they are those who know how to navigate the complexities of human relationships, who understand when to be ruthless and when to be charming, who know how to hide their true intentions behind a carefully constructed persona. Niccolò Machiavelli, in The Prince, argued that a ruler must be willing to act immorally if necessary, because the world does not reward goodness, it rewards results. This is why Myshkin's fate is so tragic. He does not understand or refuses to accept the rules of the world he lives in. He does not know how to manipulate or deceive, nor does he want to. And because of this, he is viewed as an idiot, not because he lacks intelligence, but because his goodness makes him vulnerable in a society that thrives on competition and self-interest. Think about how this applies to the real world. How often do we see truly kind, honest people being taken advantage of? How often do we hear stories of good-hearted individuals who are betrayed by those they trust? How many times have we, ourselves, felt foolish for believing in the best in others, only to be disappointed? This is not to say that the world is entirely corrupt, but it is undeniable that a certain level of cunning is often necessary for survival. Even those who consider themselves good people must sometimes compromise their values in order to protect themselves. And yet, despite all of this, we still long for figures like Myshkin, people who are truly unshakably good. But here's where things get even more interesting. Dostoevsky does not present Myshkin as a simple martyr. He does not just suffer, he also challenges those around him in ways they do not fully understand. His goodness, far from being passive, acts as a mirror, forcing others to confront their own flaws. This is what makes people so uncomfortable around him. He does not judge them, yet his very existence exposes their hypocrisy. His sincerity highlights their deception. His kindness makes their selfishness all the more obvious. And so, rather than being embraced, he is rejected. This brings us to a fundamental question. Is it Myshkin who is the fool, or is it the world around him that has lost its way? As we continue, we will dive deeper into this paradox and explore what it truly means to be good in a world that does not seem to value goodness. And in the end, we will uncover the ultimate truth about kindness, one that might just change the way you see everything. What makes Myshkin's story so tragic is not just the suffering he endures, but the way he is perceived by those around him. He does not see himself as a fool. He believes in love, in honesty, in the goodness of human nature. And yet the more he tries to bring light into the lives of others, the more they see him as an outsider, someone who does not belong in their world. But why? Why does true goodness so often create discomfort? To answer this, we must examine the way people interact with one another. Human relationships, whether personal or societal, are built on a delicate balance of power. Even in the most casual interactions, there is an unspoken negotiation happening beneath the surface. People carefully measure their words, choose their actions strategically, and adjust their behavior based on what they expect in return. It is a world of subtle manipulation, where even kindness is often given with an expectation of reciprocity. But Myshkin does not play this game. He gives without expecting anything in return. He speaks with complete honesty, without calculating how his words might be received. He forgives without holding resentment, even when others betray him repeatedly. In a world where everyone wears a mask, he is completely unguarded, and this is precisely why people do not trust him. Psychologists have long studied the concept of cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension that arises when we are confronted with information or behavior that contradicts our beliefs about ourselves. When Myshkin interacts with others, he forces them to confront their own moral contradictions. They may claim to value kindness, but when faced with true, unconditional goodness, they feel exposed. It makes them realize how far they have drifted from their own ideals. And rather than accepting this uncomfortable truth, they reject the person who reveals it to them. Consider how we often react to people who are exceptionally good. When we hear stories of selfless individuals who dedicate their lives to helping others, we admire them. But sometimes we also feel a strange discomfort. We tell ourselves that they are different from us, that their level of selflessness is unrealistic, even impractical. We may even look for flaws in them, searching for evidence that they are not as pure as they seem. Why? Because accepting their goodness would mean questioning our own choices, our own compromises, our own moral justifications. This is exactly what happens to Myshkin. He becomes a symbol of something unattainable, an ideal that people admire in theory but reject in practice. His presence disrupts the social order, not through force, but simply by existing. Dostoevsky uses Myshkin to explore a deeper truth about human nature. We do not truly want perfect goodness in our lives. We think we do, but when faced with it, we find it overwhelming, even suffocating. Goodness without calculation, without boundaries, without the usual human flaws, is something that most people do not know how to handle. And because of this, instead of elevating the good person, society often isolates them. But does this mean that goodness is meaningless? That being a good person is a mistake? Here is where things become even more complex. Despite all the suffering he endures, Myshkin does not regret his kindness. He does not become bitter. He does not wish to change who he is. And in this, Dostoevsky offers us a profound insight. The value of goodness does not lie in how others perceive it, but in its inherent nature. In other words, true goodness does not need validation. It does not require admiration or reward. It exists not because the world appreciates it, but because it is the right way to be. But this leads to a final, unsettling question, one that challenges everything we have discussed so far. If goodness is so pure, so powerful, then why does it so often lead to suffering? Why do the best people seem to face the greatest hardships? As we continue, we will uncover the final and most shocking revelation about what it truly means to be good in a world that does not value goodness. And in the end, you may find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew. If goodness is truly valuable, then why does it seem to invite suffering? Why do the most honest, selfless, and compassionate people often face the greatest betrayals, disappointments, and hardships? This question is one of the central dilemmas of The Idiot. Prince Myshkin does everything in his power to bring kindness and understanding into the world, and yet, instead of being rewarded for it, he is ridiculed, misunderstood, and ultimately destroyed. But Dostoevsky does not present this as a meaningless tragedy. Rather, he forces us to look deeper into the nature of suffering itself. There is an undeniable connection between goodness and suffering, and this is something that has been explored not only in literature, but also in philosophy, psychology, and even religious thought. Throughout history, many of the most revered figures, whether spiritual leaders, social reformers, or great thinkers, have faced immense suffering. Jesus, Socrates, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., all of them dedicated their lives to ideals of justice, truth, and compassion, and all of them were met with opposition, persecution, and in many cases, violent ends. But why? Why does the world seem to resist goodness rather than embrace it? One explanation lies in the idea that true goodness is disruptive. It challenges the status quo. It forces people to confront their own moral contradictions. And most people, whether they realize it or not, do not want to be confronted with those contradictions. They want to continue living as they always have, without being forced to examine their own selfishness, their own compromises, their own willingness to prioritize personal gain over moral integrity. When Myshkin enters the world of Russian high society, he does not fit into its structure. The people around him operate within a system of hidden motives, strategic relationships, and constant maneuvering for power and status. Myshkin does not participate in any of this, and because of that he becomes an anomaly, something that cannot be explained or categorized. And what happens to anomalies? They are either absorbed into the system, forced to conform, or they are cast out. Myshkin, unwilling to change, is ultimately rejected. This brings us to a crucial point. If suffering is often the fate of good people, then what is the purpose of being good? Is it worth it? Dostoevsky's answer to this is complex. He does not offer an easy solution, nor does he suggest that goodness will eventually be rewarded in some worldly sense. Instead, he presents an idea that is both unsettling and profoundly liberating. The value of goodness is not determined by the world's reaction to it. In other words, goodness is not about outcomes. It is not about being praised, loved, or even understood. It is not about success, recognition, or external rewards. Goodness, in its purest form, exists for its own sake. It is valuable simply because it is good. This idea is deeply challenging because it goes against everything we are conditioned to believe. We are taught to seek validation, to measure our actions by their results, to expect fairness and justice in return for our efforts. But true goodness does not operate on those principles. It is not transactional. It does not ask, what will I get in return? It simply exists. And yet, there is a paradox here. If goodness exists for its own sake, independent of rewards, then does it have any real power? If it does not change the world around it, if it does not lead to success or influence, then what is its purpose? This is the final and most difficult question we must explore. Because while Myshkin suffers, he also leaves an undeniable impact on those he meets. Even those who reject him cannot forget him. Even those who mock him are, in some way, changed by their encounters with him. This suggests that while goodness may not always triumph in a traditional sense, it has a power that is deeper, more subtle, and more lasting than we might initially realize. But what exactly is this power, and how does it shape the world in ways we do not immediately see? In the final part of our discussion, we will uncover the ultimate truth about goodness, one that will challenge everything we have explored so far and leave us with a revelation that may forever change the way we understand human nature. If goodness is not measured by its rewards, then what is its true power? If the world rejects, ridicules, and even destroys those who are genuinely good, then why does goodness persist? Why do people like Myshkin, who seem so out of place in a world driven by ambition and self-interest, continue to exist? The answer lies in something that cannot be easily seen or quantified. It lies in the silent, often unnoticed ways in which true goodness transforms those who come into contact with it. Throughout The Idiot, Myshkin does not seek to change others. He does not preach, he does not attempt to reform society, and he does not impose his ideals onto those around him. And yet, he leaves a mark on every life he touches. Even those who hurt him cannot remain unaffected by his presence. His sincerity, his compassion, and his unwavering belief in the goodness of others act as a mirror, reflecting back to people the deepest, most hidden parts of themselves. This is the secret power of true goodness. It reveals the truth. It does not force, it does not demand, it does not manipulate. It simply exists, and by existing, it forces those around it to confront their own nature. Some respond to this by embracing it. Others, unable to bear what they see, reject it. But no one remains unchanged. Think about the moments in your own life when you have encountered true kindness. Kindness given freely, without expectation, without any hidden motive. It may have been something small, something seemingly insignificant, but did it not stay with you? Did it not challenge you, even if only for a moment, to reconsider your own actions, your own beliefs, your own way of being? This is why goodness, though often dismissed as weakness, is in reality one of the most powerful forces in existence. It does not seek control, yet it influences. It does not fight, yet it changes. It does not demand, yet it inspires. And yet, this power comes with a cost. Dostoevsky understood that in a world built on self-interest and survival, those who embody pure goodness will often suffer. They will be misunderstood, they will be taken advantage of. They will feel at times as though they do not belong. But he also understood something even more profound. The suffering of the good is not meaningless. It is not a sign that they have failed. On the contrary, it is proof that they have remained true to themselves in a world that constantly tries to corrupt them. In the final pages of The Idiot, Myshkin's fate is sealed. He is broken by the cruelty and complexity of the world around him. But does this mean he was truly a fool? Or was he, in the end, the only one who truly saw reality for what it was? Dostoevsky does not give us a simple answer, because there is no simple answer. But he leaves us with a question, one that each of us must answer for ourselves. Is it better to be wise in the ways of the world, to protect ourselves, to play the game, or is it better to remain true to our ideals even at the cost of suffering? This is the choice that every person must face at some point in their lives. And the answer is not easy. It is not black and white. But perhaps the true measure of a life well lived is not in how much we have gained, but in how much light we have brought into the world, no matter how small, no matter how unnoticed. And so the final revelation is this: goodness is not about being rewarded. It is not about winning. It is not about avoiding pain. True goodness exists not because the world values it, but because it is the right way to be. And in the end, whether the world calls you a fool or a saint, whether you are remembered or forgotten, whether your kindness is appreciated or rejected, what matters most is that you remain who you truly are. Because in a world where deception and self-interest often rule, choosing to be good despite everything is the most powerful choice of all.